Hi there, time for Back Pages tonight, right here on Sky Sports News, as we bring you a first look at the sports stories that are making the morning's newspapers. And joining us tonight are the Mirror's chief football writer, John Cross. Martin Hardy of The Times is here with us as well. Very good evening to you both. We will hear from you shortly. Let's quickly run you through the back pages as they stand. The Sun are splashing on more bad news at Everton, that they report the club could be forced into major sales in June should the proposed takeover continue to stall. Elsewhere, picture at the top there of Jadon Sancho preparing for the Champions League final with Borussia Dortmund. Now, the Times have an exclusive interview with Don Carlo Ancelotti as he leads Real Madrid into this weekend's Champions League final at Wembley. The lead story relates to an upcoming Premier League vote which could provide clubs who qualify for European football after a long absence with more lenient spending rules. Let's have a look back at The Guardian. Ring of Steel is the headline there. After £5 million is spent on ensuring the biggest security operation in Wembley's history goes to plan at this weekend's Champions League final. Also, the picture there, you see an interview with Rafael Nadal, who details the gruelling physical demands that injuries have taken on his career. With a standout quote, "My body has been a jungle for 2 years." What about the Daily Mail? They carry the headline, United staff cull penny-pinching Ratcliffe to cut a fifth of workforce. That's a part of the drastic changes being planned at Old Trafford on and off the field. Plus, an image of Dan Evans, yet another British player, bowing out early, very early, at Roland Garros. Warm welcome once again to John and to Martin. Gents, let's start off with football. And the story's been moving closer and closer as the hours have progressed to being a done deal. And that's, of course, Enzo Maresca and his seemingly imminent appointment as the new Chelsea head coach. John, we're going to start off with the Mirror and see what your paper are doing on this. So, Blues want a pep-up. Fox's Maresca is the same as Guardiola. So, obviously, the blueprint is there at the Etihad Stadium, and Chelsea, it seems, are going down a similar route with this appointment as and when it gets confirmed.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the dream ticket, David, isn't it? I mean, blimey, it's not much of a target, is it? Follow the most successful manager in Premier League history and produce magical, scintillating football while you're at it, please, Enzo. So, yeah, it's a hell of a task. Look, I think it's key here, and the reason why this story then becomes much more interesting on the back of the Mirror is frankly just what they want from Maresca, and it's a style of football. It's an ability to work within a structure, an ability to work with younger players. I think that's particularly key. Guardiola's really sort of championed those players, and might come on to it later. Sort of kind of the talent at Chelsea with Cole Palmer, for example. Really, really good players. Trying to get the best out of them. Players like Conor Gallagher as well, and just really harness a unit and harness a team and a togetherness. I think it's really interesting when you hear Leicester City players talking about the difference that Maresca has made in this season, where he's taken them back into the Premier League at the first attempt. I must say, I think a few of us felt probably it was a bit of a gamble, wasn't it, on Leicester's part to kind of go down that route and go something completely different. It paid really rich dividends for them. They played really attractive football. They're ever so entertaining to watch. And I think Chelsea just want an identity back. They just want some stability as well. I mean, Pochettino showed us right towards the end of the season that there's a real squad there. There's a really strong team, a group of players that can go places, I think, under a really good, successful manager. And we read within this story that it's expected to be a 5-year contract. Now, that says to me that Chelsea, at odds, let's be honest, with recent history of the way they treat managers, but they're going to try and give him some time and patience and want him to build something long-term and really try and reap the long-term rewards from that.
Yes, it's a fascinating piece and some interesting references there by Mark Waters, including writing this thesis entitled Football and Chess, based on positional strategy and alignment of forces. He's clearly a scholar of the game. But you mentioned the length of the contract there, John. Martin, what do you make of that? And how much of a gamble is it? I mean, this guy's had 1.5 seasons in professional football management.
Well, we're looking back to Thomas Tuchel being sacked in September 2022. 20 months on, we've had Potter, Lampard, Pochettino, and now we've got Maresca. So they're going through managers at a pace which Roman Abramovich would have been quite proud of, and kind of copying that system of they will pay big to get them and pay big to get rid of them. It's interesting Chelsea are at a stage now where they feel they've built everything structurally much more sound in terms of a modern club, modern football structure, sporting director in place, the set piece department that was so important that Pochettino wouldn't actually agree to it, sports science, data analysis, and now they have the dynamic head coach. And don't want to sound contradictory here. I was at Leeds against Leicester last season, and there was much to admire in the way Leicester played the game. Leeds ended up winning 3-1, and afterwards I was kind of saying, look, what Leicester are doing will go a long way. But at the same time, talking to people from Leicester then was they'd had to have conversations with the media. This is people from the club and to the fans to say, look, we're going to play a different style here, and this is going to take a long time to implement. And also it might not be quite as exciting as you are used to watching. And Jordan Blackwell, who writes for Leicestershire Live or the Leicester Mercury, has done a piece today saying there are very few tears being shed by Leicester fans. They're really grateful for what Maresca did in terms of taking them up. There were stylistic difficulties that the supporters had in terms of getting their heads around what was going on. And at the same time, the patterns of play were quite slow, which goes back to Mike Walters's idea, which has been said a few places, of that kind of chess theory. And I'm sure we'll talk about what will happen to the style of Chelsea, but arguably the reason Cole Palmer has, apart from the fact that he's an excellent footballer, has had such a fantastic season is he's played with a great deal of freedom to get his 22 Premier League goals. He's played on the left, the front four, the right, the 9, the 10. Maresca's system will be a lot more structured, a lot more like Pep's. And that may well limit and curtail some of the magic we've seen from Cole Palmer this season. So it's going to be interesting to see what he's done. It's a difficult situation at Chelsea because you've got fans who are a little bit disassociated with the owners at the moment because there's been struggle and there's been upheaval and there's been a lot of money spent and they can't quite see where the club is going. But at the same time, as I said, you can look at it both ways here. Maresca's done a fantastic job on the likes of Dewsbury Hall, so you can develop players. When he left Leicester, before he left, there was difficulties in terms of what was going to happen in the transfer market in the summer if he'd stayed. So it'll be interesting to see whether he's, like most head coaches, are quite prepared to accept that they can't touch the transfer window.
You mentioned Cole Palmer. I know that there's a big piece in the Mirror exclusive there. We'll talk about that in a bit. Obviously, we've got the situation of a managerial merry-go-round here and who's affecting whom. Kieran McKenna being one who may be staying now at the club and not going back to where he was a coach, both in the youth system and assistant coach to Mourinho and Rangnick and Solskjaer, etc. But whoever United do get in, should they decide to get rid of Erik ten Hag, there's this really interesting story in the Telegraph, John, about whether the whole sort of United and Nice sort of situation might impact Manchester United in terms of which European competition they're playing, because of course both Manchester United and Nice are at least part owned by Ineos.
Yeah, it talks also about UEFA really needing a sort of an independent panel to rule within the next week or so. So they have plans in place, and which team goes into which competition. And you know, reading this, it looks as if one team is going to miss out, then it's going to be Man United be relegated into the Conference League. But what I would say is that we have had very similar cases in recent past. And I do think Brighton have ended up playing a Belgian team, which Tony Bloom has got an interest in. Man City have got a similar prospect, perhaps with Girona next season. And also, what is it? Villa and a sort of Portuguese side entered the same competition the season just gone. So generally, what I'm saying is a compromise is found. And I do think that the Ineos are very confident, actually, that they will find some sort of compromise in the ownership structure to detail a reason why the particular owners won't have too much controlling stake over one team as compared to the other, if you like. Generally, you find a way around it. And what I would say is that the noises coming out in the recent past of UEFA, and particularly Ceferin himself, the president, basically making it clear that, look, we have to move with the times, we have to be realistic. Multi-club ownership is the way forward for a lot of big businessmen, for a lot of big teams, and basically we will probably find a correction in the longer term, even if we have to find compromises. They've got about a week or so to convince UEFA. And I don't know, I bet that they will. I bet you will find that basically Man United, who are one of the biggest teams in the world, make absolutely no mistake about it, will be a very, very big draw into next season's Brave New World for UEFA competition, which includes a kind of a bit of a revamp and a bit of a new look for Europa League. And that's a competition that they will not want to lose Manchester United from. So my bet and my smart money, I bet, will find that within the next week or so, they'll find some sort of compromise. Oh, how cynical I am.
Yeah, and you've got to think that, Manchester United, Brailsford, Ratcliffe, etc., must have thought about this, when this whole thing came together. Let's stay with United and stay with the Telegraph for the moment, although the Mail are also covering this story. Return to office or quit. Ratcliffe's ultimatum. I mean, Martin, this is interesting. The sort of correspondence, the missive that was sent to United's non-football staff, according to the piece from James Ducker, invited to give up their jobs in an email sent across the club yesterday. And look at this for the Mail. United staff, Carl, they're a little stronger on the headline here. Penny pinching Ratcliffe to cut a fifth of workforce. I mean, they are so, I suppose, very single-minded about how they are going about things at Old Trafford in all departments, aren't they?
Well, it was interesting that had to be clarification that it was non-playing staff who had been offered a bigger bonus if they resigned by Wednesday. So I assume that wasn't open to Eric Ten Hag and his staff as a way to solve a problem that seems to be mounting. It's very easy to cut the little man at the bottom, but they don't seem to be able to make the big decision about what happens to the man at the top. And if we are to believe what's happening, that a football club that was ready to get rid of Eric Ten Hag is changing its plans for the season based on one game, then I suggest getting rid of people who were keen on working from home might not be the revolutionary step that some of the fans wanted in terms of changing the way that club has success in the future. It always seems harsh on I think the Mail and certainly maybe the Guardian was saying you may be talking about a 25% cut of the non-playing workforce. So this is people's livelihoods who earn nothing at all, like the players themselves and the management staff. So these are life-changing decisions. But I think having read about this for the last 2 or 3 months, this is kind of part of Ratcliffe's plan to streamline the non-playing side of the club to make sure that it runs a lot better. Maybe he's running that side of the business will help, but at the same time, you're talking about a ground and a first team and a manager that I think will take preference in terms of importance from all of the supporters. And we may well talk about whether Ten Hag stays or whether Thomas Tuchel has the experience to kind of oust him. But it's interesting that we're in the week after the FA Cup finals finished and nobody's still quite sure who's going to be in charge next season. And that isn't quite the dynamic new regime that we were promised.
OK. Yes, plenty to look at there. And Manchester United always such a fruitful source of stories, aren't they? Gents, thank you for the moment. We're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we'll look at more of the back pages, including, well, we mentioned it before, this Cole Palmer exclusive. He details his extraordinary first season at Chelsea, and that it absolutely has been, and his Euro 2024 excitement. Stay with us. You're watching Back Pages tonight. Welcome back to you at home. Welcome back to the Mirror's chief football writer John Cross and also Martin Hardy of The Times. OK, John, let's get back to your paper. And do you know what? Well, I love a feel-good story. I think sometimes we don't have enough of them in football, and you cannot, no matter who you support, not feel good about the form of a young player who is, in real, is at such a high point so early on in his career, such as Cole Palmer, and you've done this exclusive on him. It's incredible the impact that he's made at Chelsea in what's been such a turbulent season for the Blues.
Yeah, absolutely. And he expresses this, and he did so when I spoke to him. Really, it was a big decision for him. He's still so young, 20 years of age now, and leaving Manchester City when City didn't want to let him go. They were keen to keep him. It's clear that he's one of England's best prospects. I mean, he's so versatile. He's so exciting. I love his kind of improvisation. He just does almost football kind of on the hoof, if you like. Very instinctive, lovely skill, brilliant touch. amazing goals, and he's got so much in his locker. So it was a huge decision, I think, to leave the most successful team of the Premier League era and really push himself, and also take a new challenge on at Chelsea. It was an untried sort of time at Chelsea, a time of change, different manager. And yet I love the way that he really talks about backing himself and being bold and making that decision to go out and play. That's at the heart of it. He said, look, I believe in myself. I believe I'm ready. And I really wanted to go out there and play and push myself. And the biggest thing I took away from this was that he admitted, look, it's been an amazing season. But if you had asked me at the start, there's no way that I would have thought it would have gone quite as well as it had done. It's fantastic. His goals and assists. He's been involved in some of the most incredible games. He talks about that, sort of the emotion of that kind of magnificent Manchester United game at Stamford Bridge, scoring at Old Trafford, being involved in an absolute thrilling game against his old club, Manchester City, at Stamford Bridge. And now he's forced his way into a couple of England squads. He's in the training camp for the Euros. I mean, it's an absolutely fantastic story. And I do think that, as I say, I think he's versatile enough so he could play almost either wide position. He could play slightly deeper or kind of almost in that 10 position pushing on. I do think he's a very versatile player, incredibly exciting. And he also says to a lot of other players, go out and play. Don't get stuck in the system. He's a brilliant advert also for Chelsea because, Chelsea has been chaotic at times. But I'll tell you what, there's been some great success stories actually at Chelsea this season. And Cole Palmer, quickly followed by Conor Gallagher in my view. But Palmer, right at the head of it, has been an absolutely outstanding standout story. Fantastic story for Chelsea. Fantastic story for Cole Palmer this season.
Yeah, and potentially for England. Martin, how much do you think he will feature? And will he be a starter? And what position can you see him playing?
That's a big question. It was interesting to see Roy Keane talk, who does know something about being a very good defensive midfielder, saying when people were talking about Trent playing alongside Declan Rice as two sitters, that he was worried that would leave the central defenders far too exposed. At the same time, we may come on to Harry Maguire not being quite fit, John Stones not being quite fit. So he made us decide that FA Cup final was the kind of the icing on the cake for a brilliant season for Manu. So he may start there, and that may limit, therefore, the forward positions that are available. You might find Saka. You've got to fit in Saka, Foden, Bellingham, and Kane. So that could be your six. However, if you were to play the 4-3-3, you may be pushing him against Jack Grealish, and that's interesting because that's one of the players on the other side, but I don't think you'll get past Saka on the right. That might be the player that's blocking his path on the left. And you might, if you're Gareth Southgate, go, Palmer's playing with such confidence this season. Grealish isn't playing hardly at all. Why not take a gamble? And as John said there, the beauty of Cole Palmer is he's gone, I want to play football. He will go to the Euros this summer with exactly the same attitude, and he will push everybody that's there and try and take their places off him. And for that, England's squad will be stronger and the first team will be stronger, and they'll have a better chance of having Cole Palmer in there.
OK, let's get to some transfer news. You mentioned about players leaving Manchester City and it going well. Perhaps not the case for Calvin Phillips, though, John. Now, obviously, there with West Ham, really didn't pan out as he would have wanted. But there might be a lifeline from a team that managed to avoid relegation in Everton. Would that be a good fit for you? Do you think that would work?
Yeah, I do actually. I think that Everton, I mean, blimey, we're reading elsewhere, aren't we, that they'd have to make a fire sale first. So let's see kind of what sort of state they're in. I mean, it'll be interesting to see what, Everton's squad looks like at the start of next season, because maybe they have to kind of almost get some sales out to kind of reshape it in the way that Sean Dyche might want it. And I do think any manager would like Calvin Phillips. He's such a hard-working player. Yes, it's been a disaster at West Ham, but if you talk to anyone at Manchester City and West Ham, as I've done on numerous occasions, indeed the England camp, they will tell you that Calvin Phillips is an absolute smashing lad and basically full of heart, full of desire, determination, determined to get it right. This is not for the want of trying. It's nothing to do with attitude, anything like that. The guy wants to play. The guy really wanted to be successful at City. It didn't work out, so he pushed himself to try and get himself on the plane to the Euros by going to West Ham. That has proved to be an absolute disaster. I do think he needs a fresh start. And I do think Everton, I mean, I'm not sure he could really do too much better. It's a very stable sort of team under Sean Dyche. I think he would have a plan for him. I think he's terrific front running from deep as well. I do think there's a lot more to come from Calvin Phillips. I'm convinced that he can get his career back on track, and I think Everton would be a really good move for him.
You mentioned the Euros. I mean, the last time I had a Euros, obviously it was pushed back by a year, but he was one of the centre points of it with Declan Rice as the two sitters in that midfield. It's such a roller coaster career that these players sometimes have to endure. Let's talk about Timo Werner. Potentially, can we finally get the value out of this player who we know that Chelsea signed for big money originally? Again, didn't seem to work out that time. Now Tottenham want to go again with Werner. What do you make of this one, Martin?
Strange one. Not a strange one in that I don't think he's top notch. Chelsea just seem to go through these periods where they're prepared to spend a lot of money. Never look comfortable with the price tag at Stamford Bridge. You never think when he's through you put a serious amount of money on him finishing. And while he's done okay at Tottenham, as he scored 2 goals, 3 assists, I think that the talk seems to be that he'll move to Tottenham on loan rather than activate the £15 million permanent fee. If you're being cynical, that might tell you a little bit in terms of they're not prepared to risk even 15 million on him. He's quick. He plays that wide position very well. You get Postecoglou's squad a little bit more depth, which is what I think he will do again next season. But if you're trying to get into that top 4, you've got to take players who are clinical and definitive in the final third of the pitch. And I'm just still not quite convinced that Timo Werner is that player.
Just going to reflect one story, gents. We don't have time to discuss it, sadly. But this is another one to do with Wembley. Of course, the Champions League final this Saturday. More than 2,500 stewards, £5 million investment, including a strengthening of all Wembley's doors, a further lock system added as well. New gates and perimeter fencing have been erected, while a Zone X control room will monitor movement in areas around the stadium. On top of that, what about the stewards? Well, they will be perhaps better prepared fitted with extra body cameras. There's an expectation the digital ticketing implemented by UEFA will deter touts. And fans themselves entering the stadium with tickets for the game will face 2 checks. First, at the stadium's outer secure perimeter before presenting their tickets for entry. Of course, the context of this, of course, is what happened during the Euros final in 2021 with so much fan disorder there. And indeed, with what happened in Paris for the Champions League final between Liverpool and Real Madrid. OK, we're going to leave it there. Thank you both to Martin and to John for their company tonight.